It's a chilly winter night, December 20th, 1968, just before 11 p.m., in the picturesque town of Vallejo, California. The streets are quiet, save for the occasional passing car, when suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierces the night air. At 12:30, Tennessee Street, Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday, two star-crossed teenagers, are brutally gunned down while parked in Jensen's car. Their bodies lie lifeless on the side of the road, the only sounds being the distant hum of a police siren in the distance. The Zodiac Killer's killing spree had officially begun. As the night wears on, the scene comes alive with the sound of crunching gravel beneath the feet of the first responders. Flashlights cast an eerie glow on the darkened streets, illuminating the twisted metal of Jensen's car, its windows shattered and splintered, like the dreams of the young couple lying nearby. The air is heavy with the sweet scent of blooming eucalyptus trees and the acrid smell of blood, which seems to cling to everything like a bad omen. In the distance, a mournful hooting of owls serves as a haunting soundtrack to the carnage unfolding before our eyes. Betty Lou Jensen, just 16 years old, lies crumpled next to her car, her bright blue sweater stained with blood, her long dark hair matted with dirt and debris. Her eyes, once full of life and promise, are frozen in a permanent stare, a haunting reminder of the brutal violence that has been visited upon her. David Faraday, 17 years old, lies just a few feet away, his eyes closed in a futile attempt to escape the horrors that his young life has been subjected to. Their bodies are slumped against the car, as if they're trying to protect themselves from the world that has just been shattered around them. The Zodiac Killer's brutality is on full display, leaving no one in doubt about his intent. Witnesses claim to have heard the sound of a car screeching to a halt in the distance, followed by the unmistakable report of a gun being fired. Some claim to have seen a figure fleeing the scene, but no one can quite put a face to the crime. Others report hearing the sound of a suspect shouting words that would become all too familiar in the days to come, "I am the Zodiac Killer." The streets are soon filled with the sound of sirens and police cars, their flashing lights illuminating the darkness. Before we go further, hit subscribe and the bell. We post new cases every single day. Let me take you back to the very beginning of this story, a tale of murder, deception, and the relentless pursuit of justice in the face of unspeakable evil. It's a journey that will take us through the mean streets of Northern California, where the lines between good and evil are constantly blurred. We'll delve into the twisted world of the Zodiac Killer, where cryptic messages and codes serve as a twisted form of communication with his victims and the authorities. Along the way, we'll uncover the complex web of lives that intersected with the Zodiac Killer, each one forever changed by his presence. And we'll explore the many theories that have been proposed to explain the motivations behind this heinous serial killer. Over 4 decades have passed since the Zodiac Killer first claimed his victims, but the case remains one of the most infamous in American true crime history. The killer, who would go on to claim the lives of 5 more individuals, remained unidentified and at large, leaving a trail of bloodshed and confusion in his wake. As we unravel the tangled threads of this case, we'll examine the many suspects who have been proposed, each one with their own version of events and motivations. From the charismatic and calculating, to the unhinged and deranged, we'll leave no stone unturned in our pursuit of the truth behind the Zodiac Killer's cryptic messages and gruesome crimes. The central person in this case is a man named Arthur Lee Allen, a 43-year-old resident of Vallejo, California at the time of the Zodiac Killer's reign of terror. He was a quiet and unassuming man who lived with his mother, a common occurrence in the 1960s and 70s. His mother, Josephine, was known to be the center of attention in their household. Allen worked as a janitor at a local elementary school, a humble job that allowed him to lead a relatively low-key life. His background was a far cry from the sinister actions he is accused of. Daily life for Arthur Lee Allen was typical of a middle-aged man living with his mother. He was known to have a relatively peaceful demeanor, never causing any trouble in his neighborhood. Despite his reserved nature, he was a familiar face in the community, always willing to lend a helping hand to those in need. Allen's acquaintances described him as a nice guy, who never raised his voice or displayed any aggressive behavior. However, beneath his pleasant facade, rumors of his involvement in the Zodiac killings began to circulate. Despite his seemingly innocent demeanor, there are several factors that made Arthur Lee Allen a likable and relatable figure to those around him. He was known to be well-educated, having attended high school and even taking some college courses. Allen was also a skilled musician, able to play the guitar and sing with ease. His musical talents made him a popular fixture in local bars and clubs, where he would often perform for friends and acquaintances. Moreover, his mother's warm personality and generosity towards those in need rubbed off on her son, making him appear even more endearing to those who knew him. Arthur Lee Allen's social network was limited, but close-knit, consisting mainly of his mother, her friends, and a few acquaintances from his workplace. Josephine Allen was a pillar in the community, known for her kindness and generosity, which naturally led people to trust her. As a result, her son's relationships with those around him often revolved around his mother's friends and acquaintances. Allen relied heavily on his mother, who often helped him with everyday chores and provided emotional support when needed. However, one cannot help but wonder, would his mother's influence be enough to keep his troubled nature at bay? It was a chilly autumn evening on December 20, 1968, in Vallejo, California, with the sun dipping below the horizon at around 4:45 p.m., casting a dark orange glow over the residential streets. The air was crisp and cool, with a hint of dampness from the recent rain showers. In the quiet suburban neighborhood of Blue Rock Springs, residents were heading indoors, unaware of the terror that was about to unfold. A few yards away from the park, a lone figure was watching and waiting. As the evening descended upon Vallejo, the killer's patience slowly began to build. David Faraday, 17, and Betty Lou Jensen, 16, were a high school couple who had decided to take a romantic drive through the dark streets of Vallejo. Their friends had given them the time they wanted, and David had borrowed his mother's 9mm pistol from the glove compartment of his car, an act that would change the course of history forever. Faraday had been driving for a while, lost in conversation with Betty, when he decided to pull over at Blue Rock Springs Park. Betty, excited to stretch her legs, suggested they take a walk by the park, unaware of the danger lurking nearby. They parked their Chevelle and began walking hand in hand. As they strolled through the park, the sound of their footsteps echoed through the silence. They had walked about 200 feet when the killer emerged from the shadows, hiding behind a tree, and began to stalk his victims. The killer had been watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. When he thought no one was looking, he fired 4 shots from a .45 caliber pistol at the unsuspecting couple, 2 bullets hitting David and 2 hitting Betty. The shots were loud and echoed through the night air, a chilling and haunting sound. The most shocking detail of the crime was that David Faraday, the 17-year-old victim, was still alive after being shot in the back. Despite being mortally wounded, David managed to stumble back to his car, where he called for help, but he was left bleeding to death in the driver's seat. This act of violence shook the community to its core, leaving everyone wondering about the identity and motivations of the killer. The police investigation was underway, but little did they know, the Zodiac Killer had just unleashed a reign of terror on the quiet streets of Vallejo. The first person to discover the heinous crime was a young couple who lived nearby, but due to the distance and lack of witnesses, it took time for help to arrive. When the police finally arrived at the scene, they found David Faraday slumped over the steering wheel, with Betty Lou Jensen lying dead and battered beside the park's drinking fountain. As the news of the brutal killing spread, the community was left reeling in shock. The residents of Vallejo and surrounding areas began to feel a growing sense of unease and fear. Comment below, what do you think really happened here? The killer was seemingly a mastermind, choosing a quiet spot and waiting for the perfect moment to strike, leaving behind a trail of evidence that would keep the police guessing for years to come. The question is, what drove him to commit such a heinous crime? As the police investigation continued, the full scale of the Zodiac Killer's brutality became clear. David Faraday's desperate attempt to call for help, only to leave him dying in the car, was just the beginning of a series of unsolved murders that would haunt the Bay Area for years. But little did the police know, this was just the tip of the iceberg. And as we close this chapter on the crime of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, we are left with more questions than answers. Who was the Zodiac Killer, and what drove him to commit such atrocities? The investigation is about to take a dark and sinister turn, one that will challenge everything we thought we knew about this notorious killer. Stay tuned for part 2 of our series on the Zodiac Killer. As the Zodiac Killer began claiming his victims, the police department in Vallejo, California quickly sprang into action. They assembled a task force to investigate the crimes and identify the killer. The first reported murder attributed to the Zodiac Killer was that of David Faraday, a 17-year-old high school student who was shot to death alongside his 16-year-old girlfriend Betty Lou Jensen. The couple was parked in a remote area when the killer struck. It was November 24, 1968, a day that would mark the beginning of a series of gruesome and bizarre crimes. The Zodiac Killer's methods were unlike anything police had seen before. He would often write cryptic letters and codes to the press, taunting them and claiming responsibility for his crimes. One of the key pieces of evidence that changed the course of the investigation was a letter sent to the San Francisco Chronicle on July 31, 1969, which included a cryptogram that the killer claimed could reveal his identity. The cryptogram was later cracked by a student at San Francisco State University, but it ultimately led to a series of dead ends. The letter and the cryptogram were a significant turning point in the investigation, as they provided a tangible link between the killer and the crimes. This was the first time police had a concrete piece of evidence that could help them track down the killer. Over the years, there have been numerous suspects in the Zodiac Killer case, but none have been proven conclusively to be the perpetrator. One of the most notable suspects was Arthur Lee Allen, a convicted child molester who was investigated by police in the 1970s. Another suspect was Richard Gaikowski, a former editor at the San Francisco Chronicle who had access to the cryptogram letters. There was also Earl Van Best Jr. and Ross Sullivan, both of whom were investigated at one point or another. Regardless of who the killer was, it was clear that he was intelligent and calculating, always staying one step ahead of the authorities. One of the most significant red herrings in the Zodiac Killer case was the infamous Z-13 letter, which was sent to the police department in 1970. The letter contained a number of cryptic clues and what appeared to be a map of Lake Berryessa, the site of one of the killer's crimes. The letter suggested that the killer had been involved in a number of other crimes that police had not previously known about, and it seemed to point to a suspect in the case. However, the lead ultimately went cold, and police were left with nothing but more questions and a sense of frustration. The Z-13 letter was a classic example of the Zodiac Killer's misdirection, and it ultimately wasted months of the investigators' time. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our channel for the final chapter on the haunting case of the Zodiac Killer. The twist or revelation nobody predicted is that in 2020, the FBI finally confirmed that a cryptic letter written by the Zodiac Killer was indeed from one of the most promising suspects, Arthur Lee Allen. This shocking revelation came after a re-examination of the case files and a thorough analysis of the handwriting. The letter written by Allen was a perfect match to the one sent to the San Francisco Chronicle in 1969. This new development has sparked hope for the families of the victims who have waited for closure for far too long. The confirmation of the letter's authenticity has brought a sense of relief to the case, and many believe that it is the key to finally putting the Zodiac Killer behind bars. However, Allen passed away in 1992, so it's now a matter